In this video, we will be tasting and talking about batch 77 of the EcoChat Tea Club, a Dongding Guan Yin Oolong tea. Batch 77 of the EcoChat Tea Club is a Dongding Guan Yin Oolong. The name is derived from a place name, Dongding, which also represents a tea processing method in this case, and combined with a cultivar, the Guan Yin cultivar. So this is tea that is grown in the heart of Dongding Oolong tea country in Yonglong village, Lugu Township, Nantou County, Taiwan, and is a derivative, or a second generation, I guess, of a plot of tea that was planted about 30 years ago by a father of a tea producing family, and the son about 7 years ago now, 6 or 7 years ago, took cuttings from that old plot of Guan Yin, what could be considered an heirloom crop, because there is a different strain of the Guan Yin cultivar now that is widely planted. They refer to it as long and short leaf, or big and small leaf Guan Yin, not to be confused with large leaf type tea and small leaf type tea. This is definitely a small leaf type tea. They're just two different variations of a cultivar. And this is the older one, so to speak. So this guy that we've recently become pretty good friends with over the last 5 years or so took cuttings from his father's plot of tea and brought them to a nursery and had them cultivated into healthy saplings, and then planted them 6 or 7 years ago, and now is making a style of tea. Basically, he's making traditional Dongding Oolong with Guan Yin cultivar tea leaves. And there is a quite unique and distinctive flavor profile that comes from these Guan Yin leaves, and we think it's a really good match to use Guan Yin and process the leaves in the traditional Dongding Oolong style. This is probably a heavier roast. Well, traditionally, pre-modern Dongding wasn't roasted per se. That's a development that happened through merchants and then the tea competitions. And now the standard Dongding Oolong tea is definitely a medium roast tea. And Guan Yin, as it was basically set by the Tea Research and Extension Station about 50 years ago for the Mujia Guan Yin tea producing region in Taipei area in northern Taiwan. They kind of designated it, or they did designate it, as a heavy roast tea. This is also a heavy roast tea. I believe our friend roasted it 3 or 4 times perhaps for over 40 hours total. Purposely allowed it to set for 3 months, or now 4 months actually. That's to allow the roast to mellow, basically. It was a very prominent roasted factor when we first tasted it, but we knew that it had a good, substantial, and even then balanced composition. And now, after letting it sit unvacuum sealed for a few months, that roast has significantly mellowed. It's still a prominent note in the overall profile, but there is a lot of other things to appreciate in this quite complex type of traditionally made oolong tea. So without further ado, I brewed 12 grams of tea in about a 175 milliliter gongfu teapot, first for 1 minute, then for 50 seconds, then for 1 minute again, and then 1 minute 15 seconds for the 4th brew. And in my picture, I have the 5th brew, which I brewed for 1 minute 45 seconds. So let's have a taste. I purposely pre-brewed the tea, obviously, and let the tea cool down to basically room temperature. Guan Yin, just, well, what occurs to me immediately in terms of flavor notes is mineral, wood, kind of a wood flavor, nutty perhaps, roasted definitely, some caramelized notes in there, maybe roasted yams or winter squash, sweet roasted mineral, earthy, fairly bold overall flavor character. Really nice mouthfeel on the second brew there. The first brew is a little bit thinner, still very full flavored, but now we're getting a nice thick mouthfeel. Just enough, not really bitter, but just a tad of astringency to make the flavors pop after swallowing the tea. Third brew, 1 minute. The mineral character that I notice most in the nose, actually, when the tea is in my mouth and I exhale through my nose, I get a very mineral note, a very distinct mineral note in there. And then after swallowing the tea, all the sweetness is left. Sweetness with a kind of fresh, slightly astringent and maybe fruity, dried fruit perhaps. It's a very cured kind of character of tea. It was heavily oxidized, medium oxidation at least, and then heavily roasted. Fourth brew is still a little warm. Yeah, I just find it, basically the difference in processing between this Dongding Tie Guan Yin and Mujia Tie Guan Yin is Mujia has a very distinctive processing step where the leaves are wrapped in cloth and allowed to kind of steam in their own juices, which creates a certain tangy fermented note in the flavor profile. This tea doesn't have that because that step is not included. So our friend is not trying really to imitate a Mujia Tie Guan Yin. He's aspiring to integrate his traditional roots of traditional Dongding Oolong tea making using a distinctive character of a cultivar, the Tie Guan Yin cultivar. This is very rare in Lugu especially. There are plots of Tie Guan Yin that are grown at higher elevations now. Most of it is processed as a high mountain tea, meaning lightly oxidized and unroasted. And that has, similar to a lot of the Tie Guan Yin that comes out of China these days, that's kind of basically just a high mountain oolong as we know it here in Taiwan using the Tie Guan Yin cultivar. Those plots are, as far as I know, basically all the newer strain of Tie Guan Yin. And I'm not super familiar with what that newer strain has to offer in comparison to this. But we just think it's an interesting and worthwhile effort that this farmer is doing. He's creating a differentiating value for himself by cultivating a type of tea that isn't really grown by other people in his area. The leaves are very thick and hardy on the plant. They have thick stems, the leaves themselves are thick, an interesting kind of rounded shape. It just, it does appear to me, just kind of the aesthetic character of it appears to me to be an earlier strain in comparison to what we see widely, the Qingxin Oolong strain, along with all the hybrid cultivars. There's just something about it that looks like it hasn't been that well, like scientifically bred. There's something roots about the appearance of the plant itself. Given that they're thick and hardy leaves, the actual rolled leaves are relatively larger and chunkier. Not super large, just slightly kind of bulkier. They just have a little bit of bulk to their outer appearance. This was rolled not too tightly, which is beneficial, especially if you want to age this tea. It kind of allows the elements, so to speak, to be absorbed into the leaves more easily, rather than a super tightly rolled high mountain tea is usually what gets rolled that way. Although it's roasted quite extensively, the leaves still have a greenish hue. They're dark, but they're still on the green, green, more green than black or dark brown, and they're still supple. These are thick leaves. This is a winter crop also. So it's been on, winter crops grow more slowly, they're on the tree longer, they end up having a little bit less moisture content in the leaves, a little more fiber, so they need more manipulation when they are processed. And that kind of is reflected in the brewed leaves here. But they're not stiff or overly roasted to the point where they didn't open up or just have that kind of almost like a metally, springy kind of effect. These are still quite supple. Okay, I'm going to finish off the first brew and taste. It's just such a distinctive flavor that the Guan Yin, what the Guan Yin leaves offer. In comparison to our traditional Dongding Oolong or our roasted version of Oolong, you really can tell that it's a different cultivar of tea. So this is 1 minute 45 seconds. It's holding out. It's a little bit lighter, but still packed with flavor actually. That mineral metallic note is almost, I think it's a little bit more pronounced at this point. One more. Smoky, mineral, earthy, and a little bit of nutty. It's not as sweet on the fifth brew here. I'm gonna have a quick taste of this. This is a combination of brew 1 through 4. This often turns out to be my favorite out of all these separate brews when you get a combo of the initial brews. There is something almost fruity in there. It definitely has a sweet note. Maybe apricot, something a little more dense than a fresh fruity flavor. So there we have it. Dongding Guan Yin Oolong Tea from Yonglong Village in Lugu Township. Winter 2021 harvest. Well roasted, so it sat for a few months, and we purposely waited until this month to share it with you. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.